Member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. Congressman, good to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Let's take up Sean Spicer's argument yesterday there in the White House briefing room that General Flynn was worked under the Obama administration. He was vetted by the Obama administration, including in 2016 after these payments took place. He says the Obama administration knew about it. What do you make of that defense that it was the Obama administration's responsibility and not that of the Trump administration?
Well, I think it follows the pattern of the Trump administration, which is to blame Obama for everything and every mistake they made. The reality is he was fired by the Obama administration, and I haven't seen the security forms that he filled out to determine whether General Flynn, in fact, filled them out accurately and disclosed these trips. If he didn't, that's another problem for General Flynn. But none of this lets the Trump administration off the hook for not doing adequate vetting. They obviously knew about this trip to Russia. And I'll tell you, when I read this op-ed that Flynn wrote right around the time of the election, urging the United States to hand over Fethullah Gulen to Erdogan, this cleric that lives in Pennsylvania, that struck me as so peculiar and so odd. Now we know why. He was paid essentially over $500,000 to write op-eds like that one. There should have been red flags going up during the vetting process, and no amount of shifting blame towards Barack Obama lets the administration off the hook for this, but it obviously is also adding to the troubles for General Flynn.
Your colleague, Congressman Elijah Cummings, has expressed his frustration this week not getting access to documents he says he thinks the White House has that might shed some light on General Flynn and his relationships with foreign governments. What's your greatest frustration with the Trump White House right now as you try to conduct your investigation?
Well, you know, thus far, I think it's the effort at deflection. It's the, I think, overall unwillingness to accept the seriousness of what Russia did in the election and an attempt to distract and point fingers and point attention in other places. That, I think, has been the biggest problem that we've confronted. But nonetheless, you know, we're keeping our eyes on the ball, what the public has charged us to do. And that is figure out each and every way the Russians interfered in our election and do so in a very matter-of-fact way and follow the evidence wherever it leads.
Congressman, prior to his White House service, prior to his electioneering last year on behalf of Donald Trump, General Flynn served as head of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and prior to that, for a period of time, he was Stan McChrystal's intelligence officer in Afghanistan and received glowing grades from everyone he encountered and who encountered him. Some called him the best intelligence officer of his generation. Now, this might not be a question that you could adequately answer, I don't know, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have any sense during the course of your investigations what happened to Michael Flynn?
You know, I can't answer that in terms of the investigation. I can say that I think, you know, my understanding, quite separate and apart from the investigation, is that when Flynn was in theater, when he was working with General McChrystal, he was in the right place for his skill set, and I think he was very widely thought of. When he then took a management position where he had supervisorial responsibility not only over military but also over civilian personnel, very acute management problems quickly materialized. There were also problems with what people apparently called Flynn facts, his penchant for reaching conclusions and then sending out the intelligence agency to try to justify them. That resulted ultimately in his firing. So I think he rose to a position where he was not well-suited or well-skilled. That was a real problem. I can tell you this, my closest interaction with him prior to this time, prior to the investigation, was during the Benghazi investigation. And I remember bringing him in as someone who had castigated Susan Rice and Hillary Clinton for, in his view, misrepresenting what happened in Benghazi. And I asked him about his claims that intelligence was politicized because some of that early intelligence that suggested Benghazi began as a protest came from his own agency when he was running that agency. And his answer shocked everyone in the room, and this transcript has been released so I can talk about it, when Flynn said it did begin as a protest. And it was shocking because, of course, that was no longer the understanding. That was only the understanding in the very few short hours after the attack, and that he would be so misinformed and have said such contrary things for the last year and a half, I think, struck everybody as very bizarre. I don't know when his career went off the rails, but I suspect it was after he left that job with General McChrystal.
Congressman Donnie Deutsch, obviously, hopefully some of these questions will be answered. Just a common sense sanity check for me. Obviously, so many questions going forward is, how much did the president know about Flynn's relationships, connections with Russia? Trump was running on basically very early a bromance with Russia, and we've got to have better relationship with Russia. Wouldn't one think from a common sense point of view that Flynn would have been blabbing ad nauseum about everything he had knew connected with Russia to almost curry favor with his boss? That's what a guy who ran a company, that's common sense to me. Does that make sense?
Well, it may. I don't know. But, you know, I think one thing we have seen that's very much in the public record is after the president felt it necessary to fire Michael Flynn, and we still don't know all the details, and we look forward to having Sally Yates, among others, testify to shed light on this. Nonetheless, the president praised General Flynn. And that was, I think, the president's way of saying that what Mike Flynn did was perfectly fine with him. He was upset for the press, at the press, for forcing him to fire Flynn, but what Flynn was doing apparently had the approval of the president, if not pre-approval. It certainly was, the president was approving of his conduct. So, you know, that does raise the questions of whether there was any distance between the president and Michael Flynn, but we simply don't know the answers at this point.
Congressman, it's Bianna Golodriga. A couple of weeks ago, one of your colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, Congressman Joaquin Castro, said something that raised a lot of eyebrows when he said that what he'd been privy to and the information that he'd seen convinced him that somebody from the Trump administration or Trump team would end up behind bars at the end of the day. Given what we now know, the new revelations about General Flynn and what you've learned over the past few months, do you agree with him?
Well, you know, what I've said is that I think we should follow the facts and not predetermine where they lead. And I would say that generally about the investigation. You know, certainly there's enough in the public domain to suggest that Mike Flynn has got some serious legal jeopardy in terms of whether he took money that he had no right to take, whether he disclosed or didn't disclose, as he was required to do on his security forms and through the vetting process of these payments he received from other countries, and whether he made any false statements that would be subject to legal liability. So there's obviously a legal cloud hanging over General Flynn such that he wants immunity, but beyond that, what's in the public domain, I really can't comment.
Congressman, it's Catty here. Just to be clear and step back a bit, at the moment there is no evidence that ties anyone in the Trump orbit or the Trump campaign to the Russians in a sense that they were deliberately trying to work with the Russians to change the outcome of the American election. That's why these investigations are so important. A lot of people are starting to ask, what's happened to the investigations? Why are they taking so long? Is it the White House that's stalling the process, or is it your Republican colleagues on Capitol Hill who are making this go so slowly?
Well, you know, I'd give you really a different explanation, and that is this is a massive undertaking, this investigation. It's global in nature. It's very not only document intensive, but witness intensive, and those witnesses are all over the globe. So while we all feel a real sense of urgency about it, it simply isn't the kind of investigation you can conduct overnight. So I know people are asking, you know, why isn't the investigation over already? And I think people really need to understand, and I say this as a former prosecutor who handled large white-collar investigations, they take time to do, and if we're not going to do it thoroughly, people aren't going to be able to rely on the results we come up with. So people are going to have to be somewhat patient. I know how hard that is. Believe me, I'd like to get this done yesterday, but it is going to take time to bring all these witnesses in, to review all these records, to look at financial transactions that may span the globe. None of this can be done overnight.
Briefly, do you have a sense of how long?
I really don't. That's probably the most difficult question we get asked, and I don't think we can put an artificial constraint on it. I will tell you this, one of the biggest constraints we have is that we simply have a small staff, both our committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. I will also add that I think we are moving forward. We had obviously run into a lot of road bumps on the House side. We've now overcome those. Mike Conaway and I are working together extremely well. We're sending out letters to witnesses. We've agreed on our initial witness list. We're moving forward with hearings. So I think we are very much now full speed ahead.
All right. Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking Democrat on